These are optimistic times in 1945. The soldiers who fought against totalitarianism overseas are returning home to the most powerful nation in the world. Returning to lives interrupted, to girlfriends, to families left behind. With the war finally over and victory won, anything and everything seems possible.
People thought that after the stunning achievements of science and technology in the victory of World War II, that there was, in principle, no limit to what it could do now in the interests of the good life after the war.
The technology that had allowed us to win the war, to defeat Hitler, to defeat the Nazis, this technology could now be put into the service of liberating individuals, of helping them develop themselves. So it was a translation, I think, of technology from an emphasis on weaponry to a technology on an emphasis on the human spirit and the development of human nature. And we could translate that expertise from one domain to the other.
This setup makes any day wash day for me. And I can do my drying in any kind of weather.
By the 1950s, many Americans develop a nearly insatiable appetite for all the new things that can be manufactured, bought, sold, and consumed.
We see the idea that we could engineer the household, we could engineer the family, we could engineer all different aspects of society.
While some scientists engineer shiny new consumer goods for an eager public, Harvard psychologist B.F. Skinner seeks nothing less than the engineering of human nature. In experiments with subjects as simple as pigeons, Skinner declares that with the right social engineering, we can create a new breed of human being. Skinner is firmly in the behaviorist tradition pioneered by John Watson in the 1920s. Like Watson, Skinner contends that with the right tools, we can predict and control behavior.
Skinner really inherited the mantle from Watson of behaviorism in this country. But it's kind of interesting to think about how there's a subtle difference in the way they went about it. Watson, as we know, ended up becoming an advertising executive, ended up embracing the American value system as it existed. Skinner was different. Skinner was a visionary. Skinner felt that through behaviorism, he could influence the world towards a greater humanity, not meet humanity where it was, but take humanity to a new place through the principles of behaviorism.
Picking up where Watson left off, Skinner wants to do the rigorous science to prove that environment is everything. Change the environment, he argues, and you can change the individual. Or in Skinner's case, the pigeon.
Skinner himself was a born gadgeteer. He had, in his own early years, as a boy, for example, he developed ways of sorting ripe, I think it was cranberries, from unripe cranberries. He invented a cannon that would shoot things over his neighbor's fence. This was the kind of man he was. He was developing new ways to do everyday things in ways that were more comfortable, more efficient.
During World War II, Skinner had developed a pigeon guidance device for the U.S. military. While the Russians had dogs carrying bombs, and the Swedes had seals to blow up mines, Skinner had a plan of his own. Teaching pigeons to guide missiles to an enemy target. At the time, however, the military had no missiles to guide. But Skinner's pigeon research did not go to waste. He develops a system called operant conditioning to prove that a behavior will be repeated by a subject when rewarded. Repetition leads to reinforcement. Reinforcement to changes in behavior.
This hungry pigeon is moving about more or less at random. Sometimes it turns its head to the left. When it does, we reinforce that movement by giving the pigeon access to a dish of grain.
Skinner then waits for it to turn further. Again, more food. Ultimately, the pigeon will turn in a complete circle, having learned that only when he turns will he be rewarded.
What Skinner was able to do in very carefully controlled studies with animal models was they demonstrate that whole chains of behaviors could be built step by step so that literally you could teach a pigeon to do complicated behaviors that no one would have predicted possible.
And Skinner believes that if it works for pigeons, why not people? In Skinner's mind, behavior is behavior, up and down the evolutionary scale, and it is all learned. One of the great successes is in education. People are taught to do more complicated tasks than anyone had thought possible by breaking down behavior into small steps and giving positive reinforcement along the way.
The essence of Skinner's work was that we could manipulate the environment in ways that would permit us to produce any kind of behavior that we wished, and we could develop individuals in ways that made every possible future open to them.
The idea that anything is possible has enormous appeal in the 50s, a time when the country is changing at a mind-boggling pace. It's the baby boom era. Mothers who worked during the war are staying at home to raise kids. With economic growth and unprecedented mobility, young couples are moving around the country, living far from their parents and extended families. Mothers wanting child-rearing advice in this brave new world may not be able to turn to their own mothers. But they can turn instead to a friendly pediatrician and his popular book. Dr. Benjamin Spock offers advice to millions of worried young parents about how to raise their kids in the proper environment. He covers everything from diapers to discipline, borrowing ideas more from Freud than from Skinner. His parenting manual sells more copies than any book in history save one, the Bible.
Dr. Spock appealed to the notion that parents and experts were kind of in the child nurture business together, that they were cooperating to produce healthy children, democratic personalities, and that child-rearing manuals like baby and child care could be a kind of useful aid to those kind of home front scientists.
Home front scientists hungry for expert advice. And popular television satisfies them by bringing the latest in lab science right into their living rooms.
Conquest, the search for new knowledge about our universe, our world, and ourselves.
This monkey is an orphan, separated from his mother since the day of his birth. Literally, his life hangs by a thread, a soft cheesecloth pad that is his only companion, his only comfort. Once a day, the pad is removed for cleaning.
This is the laboratory of psychologist Harry Harlow.
Troubled, distressed, permanently deprived.
He is studying monkeys to better understand human relationships.
He may die for want of love.
Harlow believes he can use science to study love. With a series of pioneering experiments, he explores territory where few scientists have ventured.
Harlow said that there was such a thing as a science of love, for example, that love, the kind of intimacy that characterized relationships between mothers and infants, although in his case he studied monkeys, could be the object of science, that you literally could move love into a laboratory, put it under a microscope.
Harlow is studying love because he believes it makes an indelible impact on a young life. The relationship between a mother and her child, what Harlow calls our earliest social environment, could hold the key to explaining behavior throughout life. Harlow designs a set of ingenious experiments. He raises a baby monkey allowing it to choose between two surrogate mothers, a wire mother that feeds it, and a cloth mother that doesn't. A cloth mother that Harlow thinks might provide something else, comfort and love.
Here's baby 106, weaned on a wire mother. He's going to the wire mother.
But this infant quickly runs to the cloth mother, where he will stay for the next 18 hours cuddling. In Harlow's mind, choosing nurturing over sustenance. In another experiment, Harlow creates a fearful situation. Whom does the infant turn to now?
Let's find out what his reactions to his mother are when we frighten him. He's scared, all right. And he does what any child will do in a similar situation. He was running to his mother to touch her, to drive away his fear.
To Harlow, there is something about the experience of comfort and love, even more than food, that seems crucial to all these monkeys. But what happens when the infant is raised alone, without any mother at all, wire or cloth? In this situation, the orphan monkey stays alone. He won't even go to the cloth mother when frightened, but retreats into his own world. Harlow believes he has shown how want of love can damage an infant for life, and he worries the same is true for people.
What comes through loud and clear in Harry Harlow's experiment was that the early experience and the environment were crucial to the healthy development of the infant child, and that in a sense, if you messed up, if the right kind of maternal presence was not there during the critical years, then that infant might grow up to be an adult incapable of forming healthy relationships with other kinds of people.
While Harlow feels that a bad environment can damage you, there are others who believe that a therapeutic environment could provide the cure. Chief among them are psychoanalysts. By the 1950s, psychoanalysis has taken America by storm, even though Freud himself had died over a decade earlier.
There's a fundamental optimism in American society that says that it's possible to fix almost any problem. And the attitude of psychoanalysis that ultimately every difficulty could be understood, seen as meaningful, and potentially, at least, changed was something that was very appealing to Americans.
Freud originally designed psychoanalysis to help neurotic individuals, essentially normal people, disabled by inner conflicts. He never thought it could help the severely mentally ill. But his American disciples think otherwise.
One of the questions of the 1950s was how powerful would psychoanalysis be as an intervention, as a therapy? Was it only going to be a therapy for the worried well, for the mildly neurotic, for the anxious, or could it really pack a sufficient therapeutic punch to help the most brutally mentally ill of our society, the schizophrenics?
One of the psychoanalysts who believes it can is Frieda Fromm-Reichmann. Trained first in Germany as a neurologist, she believes deeply that inside every patient, no matter how seriously disturbed, lies a certain buried health that can be called forth if the treatment is right.
She developed this attitude partly having worked with brain-injured patients in World War I, where even those patients who had been hit by shells and gassed were people who could recover to a certain extent. And her whole approach to them was based on their potential for recovery, not for what was damaged. When she began to work with psychotic patients, she applied this same orientation and always searched for the part of the patient that was still intact.
When Fromm-Reichmann emigrates to the United States, she makes Chestnut Lodge her professional home. Built as a resort in the 1890s on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., it is later converted into a mental hospital. By the 1950s, Chestnut Lodge is one of a handful of private psychiatric hospitals in the country, which offers psychotherapy as its primary treatment. Only the well-heeled can afford to come here, and the waiting list is long. It is here, where psychotherapy is used to treat psychotics, that the environmental camp will face its greatest challenge.
Chestnut Lodge was a strange place, almost a mythical one, because we had fairly good evidence that they really could make a therapeutic impact that was significant on schizophrenic patients simply by psychotherapy alone.
Schizophrenia, an illness marked by a loss of contact with reality, by hallucinations, voices, paranoia. It is not well understood in the 1950s when a young girl from Brooklyn arrives seeking help. Joanne Greenberg waited 3 years to be admitted to Chestnut Lodge. She finally enters 2 days after her 16th birthday. She would later write about her illness and treatment in a best-selling book, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden.
I had no idea of what was going on the outside, but I was trying with everything I had, and I had been since the age of 6, to try and make it right, to try and fix it. I think the worst fear somehow is not to be all right, and it's only later when you finally say, A, you are never going to be all right. It is never going to be all right. That you say, well, okay, let it all go. Tell them about the blood coming out of the faucets. I see people walking along who are just masses of maggots. All right, you know, tell them about it. Well, I did.
Fromm Reichman meets with Joanne daily. She treats her with a variation of the so-called talking cure. Sitting with her patients, listening, talking, even while they were hallucinating, withdrawn, recalcitrant.
It was a very simple idea. Talk to patients. Let them talk to you. Take them seriously. Treat them as human beings. People were not just struggling with psychosis, with insanity. They also had non-psychotic aspects to their mind, to their person, and that if you could hold on to that aspect, you could make a difference.
I had therapy 4 times a week, but for those years that I was in the hospital, that's all I did, and that took everything I had. It's a very, very difficult process. My ally had a first-rate mind and would not allow me to get away with much. She was trying to elicit from me things about my life that counted in the way I saw reality. It doesn't sound like much. You see, you tell the doctor things, and the doctor hears and listens, but I think it reroutes your brain. I think it reroutes your sense of reality. I think it rewires you somehow. Because when that change happens, it's a profound change.
Joanne Greenberg leaves Chestnut Lodge 3 years after she arrived. Twice she returns for short stays. But ultimately, Joanne goes to college, marries, raises her children, and writes. For Joanne Greenberg, Fromm-Reichmann's talking cure was enough. But this turns out to be unusual. Most psychotics treated solely by talking therapy eventually relapse. So even under the best of circumstances, with the most committed clinicians, doctors who believe the environment can cure only achieve occasional success. And in the United States in the 1950s, most of the severely mentally ill are not in the best hospitals under the best circumstances. They end up in state mental institutions. Here, there is a different theoretical orientation, one rooted in biology, but again with little success.
They believed that severe mental illness were basically organic neurological disorders, essentially irreversible like most neurologic disorders, and that the victims, the patients, essentially needed to be taken care of, often care of for the rest of their lives.
The patients were doing their own thing. They were either sitting on the floor, staring at the ceiling, listening to voices. I remember in one big ward where about 150 people were sitting, the attendant, every 20 minutes or half an hour, he would clap his hands, and then everybody would get up and walk around the ward, which was quite big, once or twice, and then he clapped again and they would sit down. That's to give them some exercise. Not outside, because all the wards were locked, completely locked.
Doctors offer what they can. They douche, spray, shock, operate. Patients sit in carbon dioxide chambers, in refrigerated rooms. Their teeth are pulled. Their blood is let. Their brains are sliced. But the problem of treating the desperately ill does not abate. Neither side in the ongoing battle, at Chestnut Lodge or in the State Mental Hospital, seems to have the answer.
The great challenge in the history of psychiatry is that a given treatment has always worked for some patients and not for others. Every treatment that you can discuss, however crazy it now sounds to us, or however thoughtful, worked for some people and not for others. Doctors would try whatever seemed most successful to them.
I remember a student group went through the hospital on a sightseeing tour, medical students, and they saw patients gesticulating to the ceiling and talking to their voices. And they turned to me and asked, well, will there ever be kind of a pill that we'll give these people that will stop this terrible torture they have? And I patronizingly smiled and I said, well, it won't be a pill, but somehow we'll probably learn how to do better than we do now. But, you know, it seemed to be ridiculous.
But in 1952, in France, the seemingly ridiculous is pursued anyway. Here in Paris, at a general practice hospital, an accidental discovery leads to research on a radically new treatment, a treatment that might not only give new hope to patients, but also revolutionize the way psychiatry looks at mental illness. It begins with a surgeon named Henri Labourite in search of a medication that will calm his patients before surgery. He adapts an existing compound by adding an antihistamine. He finds that the new drug, called chlorpromazine, or Largactil, does quiet his patients.
And so he proposed to some psychiatrist friends of his that, hey, maybe this drug might be useful for your terribly crazy patients because it seems to have this favorable effect. And it was on that basis that this drug was first tried with people with schizophrenia.
The first test is tried here at St. Anne's, a French psychiatric hospital. As in the rest of Europe, schizophrenia is considered a neurological disorder, one that no amount of talking can cure. Psychiatrists Jean Delay and Pierre Denecker head up the first trial. Pierre Pichot is part of their team.
In psychiatry, we didn't know about the mechanism, the biological mechanism of the mental disorders. So everything was tried, just by, as you say, serendipity. Maybe if something has a sedative effect, it could sedate and maybe do something else.
DeLay and Denneker realize quite rapidly that they are onto something momentous. They report a transformation of their schizophrenic patients and the sudden disappearance of their hallucinations and voices. Chlorpromazine and its pioneering doctors receive wide notice in France, throughout Europe, and across the Atlantic in North America, where psychiatrist Heinz Lehmann first hears about it.
I heard about it through an arrogant, what I thought then to be an arrogant and utterly unfounded statement from the detail man of a pharmaceutical company. Usually I threw this literature away, but those I took up the next time I had time for reading, and that was on a Sunday morning in the bus stop.
Lehmann tests the new drug on nurses at his hospital in Canada. This is common practice in this pre-Sputnik era of scientific research. After that, his psychotic patients.
After 2 weeks, 2 of the patients went into remission, were completely free of symptoms. Now that I'd never seen. It isn't in the textbooks either, and it was what the French had described. I didn't believe it. I thought it was a fluke. But then, after 3 or 4 weeks, quite a few more patients were symptom-free. We had something that would turn it off like a water tap. Symptoms would disappear, whether you understood them or not, no matter what the dynamics might have been. It was like taking an aspirin for a toothache. It just cut it off. It didn't cure the toothache or the bad tooth, but the symptoms disappeared completely.
It is a new kind of treatment, a medication for the mind. Before, they had only barbiturates, which would knock patients out. Now, they have a drug that reduces psychosis without reducing the level of consciousness. It is a whole new kind of pharmacy, one that seems to target just the disease.
In a sense, the drug treatment of schizophrenia happened like all of the treatments of schizophrenia, that you are working from desperation, and if something looks like it might make an effect, you try it, because you haven't got anything to lose. And so they tried it, and this time it worked.